kick in? Is there a
Yeah,
10-second
no
lag?
hurry.
Yeah.
No hurry at all, no hurry. I was just asking how many do we expect? How many participants are we looking at?
Some 35-40. So.
Excellent.
Great. Yeah, we are live now. Great. Thank you so much and welcome to the ebaithak by Center for Civil Society. It's my pleasure and honor to host Dr. Amir Ullah Khan today with us. Dr. Amir Ullah Khan is a development economist and a professor at the Mari Chinna Reddy HRD Institute of the Government of Telangana. He's also a visiting professor at ISPP, TISS, Indian School of Business, and Nalsar, Hyderabad. Dr. Amir is a business columnist for Livement. Dr. Khan is also has been a senior advisor at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and director of the Indian Development Foundation and executive director at the Encyclopedia Britannica. Dr. Amir, it's always a pleasure to host you. Floor's all yours.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much, everybody. All of you youngsters, welcome to this conversation. It's going to be a conversation. I'm going to talk to you about protectionism and the new impact of whatever is happening around the world today. To begin with, I just ask you to think about a few questions, and those questions are very broad questions, but they invite you to think hard. My first question to you is that what do you think protectionism means? In the sense that the question I really want you to look at is that if there are 5 choices before you, one is Indian, one is Chinese, one is American, one is Australian, and one is from Congo, of say a bicycle, and you have to buy a bicycle. Which bicycle would you choose? If there are 4 cuisines in front of you, Chettinad, Chinese, Ethiopian, and Italian, what food will you eat? If you have to dress up for dinner and you have the choice between an Indian dress, a Japanese dress, and a Bhutanese dress, or a black spot, you choose? And I'm asking you a bunch of different questions. And I'm asking you to consider this, that why do you think most of us, I'm sure if I had your videos on, I could have seen you, I could have seen how you're dressed. And I'm prepared to bet that most of us, including me, are wearing, smart, casual, Western dress. We would have most probably eaten a local breakfast. I had a dosa today. Maybe a few of you had bread and jam. We are all speaking English, and our cell phones are mostly foreign cell phones. So what is it that makes us choose like this? Food, we are Indian. Clothes, we are Western. Equipment, we are from the technological world. How do we choose these things? Why don't we have everything from India or everything from abroad? We don't, isn't it? That's the premise on which this discussion on protectionism goes. I want you to think on this question. I just get back to asking a few of you about these questions. Right? I also want you to know which does India trade with the most. Think about that. Which is our biggest trading partner?
I'm really sorry, everyone. Just give us just a second. I think there's some bandwidth issue in Dr. Amir's side.
Also,
Hi, everyone. Just give us a minute. I think there's some bandwidth issues. We're just trying to get Sir back. Yeah, Dr. Amir, we can't hear you. I just want you muted.
oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's much better now, much clearer.
My bandwidth had dropped, so
No issue. No issue.
I'm just trying to change my system. But meanwhile, there are these. Did you hear the questions I asked? The
The
questions I
last
had
we
asked.
heard you, sir, was when you asked which was the biggest trading partners, and we have some answers on chat. People put USA and
Correct.
China. Yeah.
Very good. Very good. That's a good answer. The next question I have is, what is our largest export? What item is our largest export? And then my question is, what is it that we import the most? Any answers there? It's quite a fascinating thing to understand. Saloni is spot on. Our largest import is crude oil. Saloni, what's our largest export? And you will know why I am asking this question. So crude oil is right. That's our largest import. 60% of our requirement comes from outside India. But what is our largest export? Okay, I'm just switching my machine. Refined petroleum, excellent, excellent. That Madhava, yes, Pranay. Do you understand now why I'm asking that question? Yes, Ritvik, very good. You all know the answer, so it's easy for me to talk. You see, the point that we are making here is that what we import is what we export, isn't it? Our largest export is petroleum products. Our largest import is petrol, is crude oil. Okay, what is our second largest import. Second largest import. Gold, excellent. Samarth, very good. Now tell me, Samarth,
Dr. Amir, I think we lost you on audio. Amir sir, we've lost you on audio there. Yeah, we can hear you now.
I am. Is that working better?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can someone hear me?
We can.
No?
We can, Dr. Amir. Yeah, we can. Please go ahead.
Is that better?
Yeah. That's much better, Dr. Amir. Thank you so much. Uh, Doctor, every time I think you're connecting the earphones, we are losing you. Without it, we could hear you. Yeah, now we can hear you again.
Is that okay? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Sorry. Okay.
Great.
All right. Okay. So if you can hear me again, I'll repeat my question, which was that gold was our second largest import. What is our second largest export? Did anyone answer that? If you have, can you put it on the chat window? Jewelry. Excellent, Pavi. Pavi is right. Gems and jewelry. Saloni. Excellent. So do you see what I am getting at? That our largest export is crude oil, petroleum, unrefined petrol. We bring it in, we refine it because we have the world's largest refinery. Anyone knows where the world's largest refinery is? Yeah, just keep typing. You know, this really is the CCS ebaithak. So everybody has to talk, and I'm very happy that you are all answering these questions. Excellent. Vikas, Ritvik, it is Jamnagar. You know the guy who owns it? Reliance, absolutely. You know, you realize why Reliance is so important. That, see, we have the world's largest refinery. We don't have petrol, crude oil, but we have the world's largest refinery. We are among the countries in the world who are the cheapest when it comes to refining crude oil. Go back to your classroom in class 9 or 10 or whenever you guys do this. We used to do this, I think, in class 8 or 9, where we used to study the refining process of oil. You put oil into a refinery. First stage you get kerosene, then you get diesel, then you get petrol, then you get airline fuel. Remember that refining process. So when we buy crude oil from, say, Iran, our largest source of crude oil used to be Iraq before Saddam Hussein did all those things he did, and Iraq got shut down. So we moved to Iran. Iran became our largest supplier. Then, Barack Obama and Bush and all got very upset with Iran. They got very upset with India for dealing with Iran. Then we have to dump Iran. Now our largest source is either Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates. But our refined oil, our petroleum products, they keep going to these countries. And that is why you'll realize why Reliance is so interested in that oil pipeline through Afghanistan and Pakistan into India. They've been trying that for several years now. It will make it so much simpler than shipping things from the Suez Canal. So, what is my point? And this is a point that I am asking all of you to read about. My first recommendation when I am talking about trade is that one of our foremost trade economists, his name is, I don't know if anyone, I'm sure you've heard of his name, but his name is Paul Krugman. Paul Krugman got his Nobel Prize in 2008, and he got his Nobel Prize for pointing out this precise thing. Paul Krugman said that what you import is what you export. Yeah. What did he call it? He called it the new trade theory. The new trade theory, according to Paul Krugman, looked at the entire trade discussion in a different way, in a modern way, in actually what was going on. See, we traditionally we all believed, according to Adam Smith, we said that countries have absolute advantage. One country has an absolute advantage in producing rice, and therefore it will export rice. That's it. Then we had David Ricardo. What did Ricardo say? He said comparative advantage. That India is better at producing rice than producing wheat. So India should export rice and import wheat. Krugman, 150 years later, said, you know what? That is not true. All countries, they basically import and export the same thing. India imports petrol or oil and exports petroleum. India imports gold and exports jewelry. India imports leather and exports leather products. Therefore, when there is an increase in the price of crude oil, India's import bill goes up, India's exports become expensive, and therefore the trade gap becomes bigger. We are unable to import because the price is high. We are unable to export because the price is high. If the government, in one strange decision 2 years ago, decides to increase the duty on gold, suddenly 2 years ago, the finance minister announced that the import duty on gold will go up. A few people said, wow, that's a great thing, because, all these silly Indian women, they buy gold. Little knowing that household expenditure on gold is very little. Our gold comes because our industry imports gold to convert it into jewelry and send it abroad and earn dollars. The moment we increased the import duty on gold, the export of gems and jewelry came down. That is the first lesson in protectionism. That if you want to protect your industry by increasing tariffs, by increasing customs duties, you are hurting your own industry. Suppose we increase the price of active pharmaceutical ingredients. They are called APIs. What is an API? API is the raw material that goes into making drugs. We are the factory of the world. We are the pharmaceutical factory of the world. 50% of drugs in the world, 50% of vaccines in the world are made in India. However, they are made using imported APIs. 70% of those APIs come from China. Suppose we increase the price, the customs duty on API, because we don't want to import. We want to encourage local industry. What will happen to our pharma industry? And that is what has happened. At the moment we increased import duties, the moment we became protectionist in terms of pharmaceutical ingredients, exports dive down. All right. So that is the first point I want to make. And this you will see, you can take several examples from everywhere. What is Japan's largest export? Take a guess. What is Japan's largest export? Not electronics. Vikas and Arjun are right. Cars. Most of you think of what car you drive or your parents drive. I have a Honda. I used to have a Suzuki. Before that, I drove a Toyota. Those are the cars we buy, isn't it? Across the world. So Japan's largest export is cars. What is Japan's largest import? Take a guess. Not oil pump. Vikas is close, but the answer? Japan's largest import is cars. The interesting thing, the Japanese say that you guys buy Suzukis and Hondas and Toyotas and drive them. I want a BMW. I want a Mercedes Benz. I will buy from Germany and the UK. Which is the world's largest importer of agricultural goods? Importer of agricultural. Take a guess. Not Japan. US. Absolutely right. The world's largest importer of agricultural goods. Our basmati rice, for example, goes to the US. Vegetables from Malaysia, fruits from Latin America, they all are imported by the US. But who is the world's largest exporter of agricultural? The US again. Yes, Tab. When you go to the mall next time and pick up fruit, look at where it is coming from. Those red, delicious apples that you buy, those very good looking, luscious red apples, where are they from? What are they called? They're called Washington apples. Oranges. Florida oranges. Yes, corn, maize. Last time I was driving from San Francisco to Los Angeles. It's a big state, right? The state of California. So we were driving for hours, and for several hours, both to the right and left of the highway, were these big orchards. What orchards were these? These were all almond orchards. All the almond that comes to India now comes from the US. The most interesting thing, have you ever eaten dates? I'm sure you have. Right? At least you have seen dates. One always thinks that the best dates come from Iran or from Arabia, one of these desert places. But the best dates I have had, and I can get you a lot of people who swear by the same. The most delicious dates I've had are California dates. Big, luscious, juicy, tasty dates. So, this new trade theory says that exports are a function of imports. You hurt exports when you hurt imports. It is a very inward looking. It is a very dangerous thing to curtail imports for any country. When the US did those trade wars and stopped buying from China, which industry suffered? The US or Chinese? When we decided to not import from the US, right? It is the country that stops importing that suffers. Imagine if India decides that these Chinese are bad people, they have occupied our territory in Ladakh and we can't do anything, we can't fight with them, they're a very big army. But let us, put trade sanctions. Can we do that? Why are we so quiet suddenly when China has occupied so much of land and does that every other day now when they are causing all such trouble in Manipur and Assam and whatever? Why are we not doing anything? Why are we not saying, okay, we will stop trading with China? China is our largest trading partner. We have a huge trade deficit with China. Why are all these big leaders of ours who keep shouting against foreigners and Pakistanis and whatever? Why are they so quiet about China? You can't. Can you afford to stop trade with China? We won't be able to talk today. All our routers are Chinese. All our cell phones, 50% of our cell phones are Chinese. So you see the importance of trade. You cannot stop trade. So that is one. The second point I want to make is, the second question I have is that, take two countries. One is a large country, one is a small country. They don't trade with each other. Suppose they start trading with each other. Suppose they open their borders. My question to you is, intuitively, which country do you think benefits more? You get my question? There is a large country and there is a small country. They don't trade with each other. But when you start trade, suppose something happens and you start trade, then which country benefits more? Excellent answers. Rishikesh, Tarush, Vikas. It is always the smaller country. The reason I asked you this question was that whenever you do this, whenever you encourage people to start trade, the smaller countries protest. No. How can we trade with such a big country? We will get killed. Our sectors will get submerged. Our infant industry will suffer. 25 years ago, when none of you were around, I remember very well. Yes, Tarush, Mexico is a great example. Take our example. 95, 96, we were contemplating that should we start trade with China? Everybody went up in arms. No, how can we trade with China? China is such a big country. We will get killed. All our industry will die. We cannot have trade with China. 97, lo and behold, we started trading and look at it. We are a stronger country. We have benefited more than China. When we had a free trade agreement with Sri Lanka, the Sri Lankans protested. So Sri Lanka is a tiny, small country. But when you evaluate the impact of trade, you find that Sri Lanka has relative. India has also benefited. You see, the beauty about trade is that both benefit. But the smaller benefits relatively more for obvious reasons. I remember we were in a trade delegation to Pakistan, so 15 years ago. The same problem. The Pakistanis were saying, no, we can't trade with India. India is very big. They will just eat away all our sectors. And the argument we were making was, no, that is not going to be the case. You will benefit more. When Bangladesh trades with India, Bangladesh benefits more. Nepal benefits more when it trades with India. When we impose those sanctions against Nepal like we did 2 years ago, Nepal really suffered. So that's the second aspect of protection. That if you are a smaller country, you should not be protecting your industry. You will suffer if you protect yourself. You will suffer if you impose trade sanctions. It doesn't really matter to the big country. China, suppose India stops trading with China. China's export volume is roughly $6 trillion. $6 trillion is China's export a year. India says we will not buy anything from China. What does China lose? China loses $70 billion. Not even 1%. But for us, $70 billion is 25% of our 20% of our total import. That's if 20% becomes expensive because we now have to buy from expensive countries like Germany and Netherlands, then we suffer. That is why to talk about protectionism for a poor country, for a smaller country, is a self-inflicted hurt. Who is this? Tarush has given the great example of Mexico. When the North African Free Trade Agreement was signed, then a lot of Mexicans said, no, how can we trade with the US? Everything will get swamped by the United States. The truth was otherwise. After a while, when Mr. Donald Trump became president, he was so afraid of Mexico that he wanted to build a wall and stop the Mexicans, stop Mexican trade. That's what happens. Okay, so that's the second point. The third point that I want to come to is the COVID issue, right? We are looking at COVID and we are looking at the fallout of COVID. How has the world changed, or how is the world changing after COVID? What is happening there? One of the big impacts of COVID has been on economic growth. Right? Certainly a lot of people, its biggest impact is on health. A lot of people who fell ill, several who died. So it is a healthcare emergency, and therefore that pandemic really impacted the health situation in the country. But if you look at the next thing, what it did was that it impacted the economy. Look around you. I live in Hyderabad. I stay very close to what is known as Hyderabad Cyber City or High Tech City. No traffic on the roads even now. Everybody is sitting at home. Offices are shut down. Most of them are working from home. A few people come now. But 1.5 years later, that whole city is a ghost city. It used to be buzzing with traffic. I used to shudder going there because of traffic jams. Nowadays we are cycling as a hobby, and the coolest place to go to is High Tech City because there's no traffic. So what has happened is that the economy has got impacted the most. Within the economy, what has got impacted the most is trade. Most countries have put all their money into healthcare, and therefore all exports are down. Most of our export sector suffered as export orders dried up. They were bound to, isn't it? When most of your budget goes into healthcare, you stop everything else. Even in India, we stopped importing several things. We are focusing more and more on the domestic economy. In this scenario, if we now decide that we will make in India, then what do you have? Take the pharmaceutical case. Suddenly, and this is one of the most articulate, one of the most desperate impact of protectionism. Look at what happened to our case, and it is such a big advertisement against protectionism. What did we do? Let us remind ourselves. Last year, we announced a lockdown, right? The famous March 24 lockdown. And in 4 hours time, everybody has to sit at home and not get out. If they come out, they will be penalized, they'll be jailed. In some cases, in some states, including mine, the chief minister apparently said that we will shoot at sight if you step out. Police started beating up people in that infamous case in Coimbatore, where these two small shopkeepers who were shutting down their shop a little late were beaten to death by the police. So we locked down. After locking down, what did we all do? We all said, look, this is a new virus, this is a new problem. Let us all wait for the vaccine. And everybody around the world started working on vaccine. Every pharmaceutical company shifted its entire research division into developing and inventing a new vaccine for COVID-19. What did we do in India? We said, make in India. We will make a vaccine in India. The Prime Minister announced that our vaccine will come out on the 15th of August, 2020. Bharat Biotech will be an Indian vaccine that will come out. It did come out much later though. But even now, nobody recognizes. You can't travel with a Bharat Biotech vaccine certificate. Why is that so? Well, various reasons. The simple reason being that most of us who work on health economics are still waiting for Bharat Biotech to declare its data. See, what happens is vaccine efficiency is a function of trials. You go out, you do some trials. Earlier, you used to do animal trials, then trials on people and so on, and publish that data. And that is when people get to know that it is safe. Our companies could not do. They haven't done it till date. We are still waiting for that data. Meanwhile, they've got approved and they're selling, and people are very scared. As a result, what happened? Because we said we will only have vaccines from Indian manufacturers. Two Indian manufacturers. One, Bharat Biotech, which has produced a vaccine in India, and the other, Serum Institute, which has bought a vaccine from Oxford, from the UK, and is manufacturing it here. So in some sense, it is a make in India. What happened as a result? As a result, we realized with a start, when the second wave hit us, that we don't have vaccines in India. While the whole world was buying vaccines from everywhere, wherever they were available, we were depending on made in India vaccines, which were not available. Even now, look at the numbers. We are 96th in the list of vaccinated population. We have 6% of our population vaccinated. 6%. 1 year after the vaccine was invented. And that is why you are all suffering. You know why you are suffering? You can't go to school. Because our vaccination rates are so low. What should we have done? What we should have done last October is that as soon as we got to know that there are 23 companies that are going to manufacture vaccines, we should have gone to everybody and said, sell to us. We will buy 1 billion vaccines because we needed 2 billion vaccines. Instead, we said, wait, we will buy from our own company. One small little pharmaceutical company that does not have the capacity to produce 1 billion vaccines. Even now, it doesn't. Even now, we still depend on those. We still are dragging our feet over buying Pfizer and buying Moderna. This is where protectionism actually hurts, in the sense it kills people. The new estimates say that about 4 to 5 million people died, and most of them during phase 2. What is the ironical situation there? That phase 2 deaths were deaths that happened after the vaccine came. When we should have had vaccines available in India from anywhere in the world. Chinese, Russian, Bolivian, Brazilian, how does it matter? What is more important? That we should make in India, or that we should vaccinate India? Okay, so that's the That's the third point. In the COVID example was a very loud example of how protectionism not only hurts the economy, but actually kills people. Now that we have told Serum Institute that we will not allow you to export. Now we have suddenly gone to the other extreme and we have said we will not allow you to export. You have to give to us first. As a result, what's happening? A lot of African countries which had booked their orders are not getting vaccines. They are seeing a rise in the number of deaths. That's a dangerous game to play. So therefore, point number 4, that as the economy now somehow starts rebuilding, we are still in a bad way. We had a contraction in growth rate for the first time in living history. Last year, when in the first quarter, we contracted by 25%, something we never ever imagined would happen. But we are, struggling. The IMF is now saying that we might grow at some 8% this year, which means that from the debacle last year, effectively over the last 2 years, our growth rate will be 1.5% or 2% at best. And therefore, a lot of that impact will come on imports and exports. You won't have the money to import or the capacity to export. Post-COVID, therefore, as we struggle to recover, we cannot afford to have expensive imports. We cannot afford high import duty. And that is why any protectionism now is only going to hurt us more. Look at the strange ways in which protectionism has worked post-COVID in India. It's a very strange thing. What has happened over the last 1.5 years? Not only have we become protectionist and wary of imports from outside the country, we are also now talking about import restrictions within the country. Remember that horrifying migrant labor migration? People walking back home, dying on the way, dying on railway stations, climbing on trucks and going, thousands of them. What happened after that? After that, Haryana said, we will not employ non-Haryanis. Those who earn more than 50,000, less than 50,000 will only be Haryanvi. Madhya Pradesh said some 80% reservation. Andhra government said similar stuff. Now we are protecting our states. Now we are going against our constitution, which allows us to move freely within the country, and saying we will not allow you if you are from another state. We saw those things, oxygen moving from Haryana to Delhi, Haryana government stopping the oxygen, saying no, we will not allow it to go to Delhi. This is what happens, that when globalization is seen as a bad thing and when protectionism becomes a virtue, then there is no end to it. Look at what is happening in Assam and Manipur. Would it have ever have been imagined? We have border fights between two states. There are travel advisories, apparently. Assamese have been asked not to travel to Manipur within India. So that's my final point. That if we do not understand what trade is, or what trade benefits are, or what happens because of protectionism, then we are bound to end up paying with our lives like this. The second phase deaths were an extreme case of we having paid with our lives because we weren't ready with oxygen plants, because we weren't ready with all the drugs that we needed to cure HIV, to cure COVID-19. And worst of all, we didn't have vaccines. The world's largest vaccine manufacturer was left desperately looking for supply of vaccines. In the vaccine story, you will find a lot of people talking to you about how some people are not taking vaccines and they are hesitant and so on. That's in economic terms, that's a problem that comes later. Demand as a problem comes later. The first is the supply problem. Where are the vaccines? First, we need to sort out the supply problem. Then demand will take care of itself, says law. If there is no supply, then what are you talking about hesitance? Why are you talking about? Every day there are stock outs. And therefore we have this crazy situation where we are trying to sell those vaccines and selling them for all sorts of fancy prices. The world's most the pricing of vaccines is the highest in India, where that same Covishield is selling for something like $20, 1,400 rupees or 1,300. So therefore, as we get in, hopefully, as we get out of this tragedy and get into a world that is a post-COVID world, several things will have changed. The easiest thing that countries will do now and have started doing is stop travel. In the US, there is a red alert against some people coming from India. Same in the US, same in the UK. Australia, remember, Australia passed a very bizarre executive order a couple of months ago. They said even if Australians go to India, when they return, they will be jailed. They will be jailed for traveling to India. That's what the Australians said. And therefore, this will be such an easy thing to do. Because, why are we doing this? The WTO allows it. If there is a health emergency, you can impose any sanction. And therefore, countries will willingly impose any sanction. And that's the tragedy. You see, last year, some of us very foolishly were gloating over the fact that, there is a Chinese virus, so businesses will go away from China and they will come to India. Now, nobody is even talking about the Chinese virus. The whole world is talking about the Indian variant of the virus. There are no travel advisories against China. There are travel advisories against India. China is vaccinating everybody there. US is, UK is, Bhutan is, Nepal is, Bangladesh is. And here we are unable to vaccinate because we are still waiting for an Indian vaccine. We still don't want a Pfizer vaccine. The US government has sent a huge gift of Moderna vaccine. We don't want to take that because the moment we accept that, it means that we have accepted Moderna, that we are allowing Moderna to sell in India. And that is why you see post-COVID, the impact is going to be very huge and people will have all justification to put sanctions. That is why we should be prepared. There will be a lot of travel restrictions. There will be a lot of import restrictions. There will be a lot of movement of goods restrictions. For all of you youngsters, the worry is going to be, firstly, those of you who are not 18, when are we going to get a vaccine for? We should have by now got vaccines and vaccinated our 12 to 18 population. Because once we vaccinate you, we can start our schools and college. The impact this has had on all of you staying at home. Over the last 18 months, most of you have stayed at home instead. While it's a great experience and all the web platforms have done very well, there is still a lot of excitement that one misses. I teach, and I always miss my classroom. I mean, it's very convenient for me to sit in my pajamas in my bedroom and teach. The most I travel is from one bedroom to my study. But that is, that's not what I wanted to, or what I want to do. So, as I now end my talk and take your questions, I just want to summarize. I want to say that the first lesson we need to learn, all of us across the world, and this is a problem not just with India, trouble with most countries. The US is culpable of this, that we all started looking at trade as a negative issue. Some earth calls it stalled globalization. Uh, Joseph Stiglitz called it discontent against globalization. Over the last 20 years, for some reason, most countries in the world became upset with globalization. You should read that book, Joseph Stiglitz' book, Globalization and Its Discontents. Why did the globalizing world of the 20th century suddenly turn inwards? Make in the US, trade wars with China, make in India, make in Japan, trade restrictions, travel restrictions. What happened? What happened was this inability to understand that imports and exports are positively linked with each other all the time. You hurt imports, you will hurt exports. That's the first point. That's the Paul Krugman point that I wanted to make right in the beginning. The second point that we were looking at was that protectionism hurts the smaller country. Trade helps the smaller country, always the smaller economy. And you can take any example of that. The third is this whole emphasis on nationalism, on nationalization, on national goods. There is nothing like that. In an efficient economy, what matters? My first question, that when you have 5 different goods to choose from, you don't look at the nationality of goods. You look at the quality of that, and you look at the price of that. That's all. When you go and buy a pen, do you look at whether that pen was made in Kerala or Jodhpur or Dhaka or Cambodia? You check it out. If it's a nice, smooth pen at the cheapest price, you will buy it. That's rational behavior. We are not rational. I asked you those bunch of questions. We are not rational when it comes to food, because food is not a rational. Right? If you like a dosa and you do not like a shepherd's pie, then that is the situation. Then you will pay higher to buy a dosa. So food is not a rational choice. That's why food habits become global much later on. The Japanese still eat sushi. The Chinese still prefer Chinese. We still like our biryani and our dosa. However modern and however Western, we become otherwise. But when we buy a cycle, when we buy a router, when we buy a cell phone, then we are looking at the best and the cheapest. And the final point that I made was that in this post-COVID world, protectionism actually kills people. It's not just a trade, it's not just an economic issue, it's not just a trade balance issue. It's loss of lives. And we have seen that, we have suffered that. Those pathetic images of people walking back home, of people dying waiting for hospital beds, sitting in parking lots, of gasping for breath as oxygen supplies disappear. Those images will not go away for a long, long time. And those images are, in a lot of ways, while it is about inefficient governance and about various issues, about, you can talk about supply shocks and whatever, but essentially, those images are a resultant of our ultra uber nationalism that made us protectionist. Right? I will stop here and encourage you for the next half hour to ask me whatever question that you have, either from what we've discussed so far or from anything else that you have in mind. Please feel free.
Thank you, Dr. Amir. We already have a lot of questions, but I'll also Samruddha, can you reshare the slider link again in chat? Good, so that in case there are any other final questions, you can add it. So the first question, which you can see at the top, says, is trade deficit something you need to worry about, or is it largely irrelevant?
Very good question. Extremely good question. And I know that I didn't talk about it deliberately. What is a trade deficit? A trade deficit, very simply, mathematically, is exports minus imports. Yeah. So if I am exporting $100 worth of goods, I'm importing $120 worth of goods. I have export minus import is equal to minus 20. It is an export deficit. It's a trade deficit. Look at India's case. We have an overall trade deficit, right, of roughly some $200 billion. Our largest trade deficit is with China. because from China we import and we export very little to China. We have with the US we have a trade deficit. With Japan we have a trade. Almost with most countries we have a trade deficit. And there are a few countries with which we have a trade surplus. Some African countries, the trade is very small, so the surplus is also very small. The largest is the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, where we have a trade surplus. That's why the UAE is so important for us. It not only sells us crude oil and so on, it also buys so much from us. But otherwise, we have a trade deficit. Now, if I am exporting $100 worth of goods and I am importing $120, I have a trade deficit of $20. Is that a problem? It is a problem if we don't have any sources for getting those $20. Then it's a problem. But if we can get those $20 from other sources, there is no problem at all. What is India's source of dollars apart from exports? India gets nearly $80 billion of NRI remittances. So half your trade deficit is taken care of by all these plumbers and masons and so on who work all over the Middle East and those software chaps who work in the US. Then we get foreign investment. And that has slowed down a bit over the last few years, but we still get substantial amounts of foreign investment, both as direct investment and as investment into what is now a bustling stock market. The stock market, interestingly, as the economy is struggling, the stock market is doing well. Why does it happen? If several people ask this question, that if the economy is in such bad shape, why is the stock market doing well? The answer simply is that in bad times, ironically, stock markets do well. In any war, in any drought, in any situation across the world, stock markets do well. And the simple reason is that people have nowhere else to put their money into. You can't buy gold, it's already gone to a peak. You can't buy real estate because real estate prices are coming down. The only thing you have available is the stock market, and also because of interest rates. But that's besides the point. The point is that we are able to finance our trade deficits very easily because we have a very strong diaspora that sends back remittances, and because we have foreign investment coming in both directly and indirectly. That is why, for a country like India, trade deficit is not a serious issue. Next question.
Great, thank you. This quick question on: is there a difference between the Atmanirbhar Bharat scheme and the import substitution scheme?
Between what?
Atmanirbhar Bharat policy and import substitution.
Yeah. So see, in a lot of ways, the two schemes are similar. The import substitution scheme 70 years ago, what did it say? It said we don't have foreign exchange. We don't, therefore will not import. And whatever we need to import, we will make in India. The Atmanirbhar Bharat scheme doesn't have that problem. We have dollars. We have lots of dollars. But we are saying, no, we don't want to import because we want to make in India. In the import substitution, the idea was to conserve foreign exchange. In the Atmanirbhar scheme, it is to produce locally. The import substitution scheme was a economic measure. Atmanirbhar scheme is a political measure. It's nationalism that is driving the Atmanirbhar scheme, because when in India we must produce in India and buy from India. That's usually what happens whenever a country goes through this phase of strong nationalism that we are going. This goes to Suwalal, who has asked this very interesting question. Exactly the same. Do you think that protectionism in political terms is encouraging the ideology of nationalism? Actually, Suwalal, it is actually the other way around. It is nationalism that encourages protectionism. This is a very fabulous question, so let me explain the political journey of nationalism. You see, 150 years ago, 150 years ago, a new term came into our dictionary. It came in Europe, especially in Germany and Italy. In Germany and Italy, for the first time, we heard a new political concept emerging, and that new political concept that was emerging was nationalism. In Germany, Bismarck started the concept of German nationalism, and Garibaldi in Italy talked about Italian nationalism. What were they saying? They were not saying German country. They were not saying German citizenry. They were not saying German kingdom, which were the words we used earlier. They were saying German nationalism, Italian nationalism. What was the difference? The difference between all other words and a nation was that while all other words were inclusive words, that those who are in, those who want to come, we want to make a country. We want people to come to our country. We want people to come to our kingdom. The nationalism principle was an exclusive principle. That here are the borders, and at these borders we will stop you from coming. We will stop your goods from coming in. Nationalism actually was something that was promoted very largely and always is by small traders, by small businesses, by small industry, which does not like competition. And therefore the Italians said, we don't want competition from Poland. We don't want competition from France. We want borders closed. And the best way to do that was to evoke this emotional thing about all of us who speak Italian should be one country. All of us who speak German should be one country. There were different countries at that time. Germany was not one country. There were several different countries that were, Bavaria was one country, Austria was one country, and so on. Similarly, in Italy, Naples, Sicily, these were all separate kingdoms, separate countries. Nationalism brought them together because it told the local trader that we will not allow foreigners to come in, and therefore you will be protected. You will always find that nationalism becomes a politically strong concept whenever the small businessman who is wary of competition becomes politically strong. And that is why this is a fabulous question that you asked. That it is that wherever you see, whenever there is emergence of nationalism, you will find protectionism becomes very strong. Why did we globalize so fast in the 80s, 90s, and 20s? Because in the 80s and 90s in the last century, we had all stopped talking about nationalism. We were all talking about globalization. We were all talking about being global citizens. We were all talking about being multinational, transnational companies. And as that became a big thing, what Stiglitz said when he talked about the discontent with globalization was that a lot of people also started getting hurt. And they said, no, we don't want foreign competition. Look at what's happening in India. All these big fellows are saying, we will run retail chains, but we won't allow foreign retail chains to come into India. We will run e-commerce companies, but we don't want Amazon to have the same level playing field. We will not allow Alibaba to come. That's what, and what helps them is a political sense of national. These foreigners, they should not come. Yeah, so that's a great question.
Amir, so there are two similar questions related to what you just spoke about. One is about Tesla. Elon Musk, Tesla had recently said that they can't invest in India because of the extended tariffs. Hence, they can't make electronic vehicles. So a lot of domestic car manufacturers had got back saying, no, you shouldn't be removing tariff because you'll lead to job loss of people here.
Yeah.
And another question that I think Vikas asked is, like, if it's so clear among economists that free trade helps all countries, then why is there a push against globalization among governments?
Very true. Very true. Yeah, that's right, Tarush. That you will find that in the US, it is very funny. 200 years ago, the Democrats were those who wanted protectionism and those who wanted, tax, low taxes, and so on. In the US, the Republican Democrat stand has changed. And now you will find that the Republican in the, is so much anti-trade, because now they want to protect the trader in in various parts of Texas and whatever. They don't want competition. They think that buying from China is wrong. They think that migration should not happen. They're all migrants, by the way, right? So you're right, Tarun, well said. Now, to get back to that question that you just asked, uh, can you just repeat it? The question was,
Yeah, the two different questions that were merging was one on Tesla saying that if you remove
Tesla,
tariff,
Tesla. Yeah. So look at Tesla. Now, what, and the reason I'm very amused at the Tesla story is that, when those of us who are your age or a little older, when the first reforms happened, it was exactly the same story. 91, 92, 93. We were starting to open up India. And there was such excitement. Everybody said, wow, opening up the airline sector, excellent. Now we will have we will have Air India competing with other airlines. We will have new airlines, new airports. Opening up banks, wonderful. We will have foreign banks. But the moment Manmohan Singh announced an opening up the automobile sector, the entire auto sector said, no, 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 no. How can you have auto sector opening up? So many job losses and so on. I mean, people ignored them and opened it. And nothing happened. Bajaj still remained one of the largest in the world. Hero became the largest motorcycle manufacturer in the world. And we all suddenly had access to very efficient bikes. All of you who roam around in these fancy bikes, what you don't realize is what we went through when we were in school and college. We used to ride those lousy, Chetaks and whatever, which were terrible machines. The same story is happening 30 years later. The same fellows are now saying we want protection. There is nothing new in this argument. It's a very clear argument, right? We've seen this, and every time this happens, it's true. Intrinsically, if we get a chance, we will try to curtail competition. If somebody is better than us, then that fellow doesn't show up on the 100-meter run, then you are happy because you're going to win easily. And that's why the regulator is very important, has to ensure that nobody's whim and fancy stops people from coming in. Take the airport sector. Why are all airports being bought by one entity, Mr. Adani? Why can't we have others? Why can't we have, the Munich airport and the Singapore airport coming in and running our airport? They do it so well. So the same story will happen again. And it is really a question of how intrinsically open we are as an economy to allow competition to come in, because we all know what the role that competition plays in building an economy. Yeah.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up on that. The other question is, so as Vikas asked, like if all economists agree that free trade is good, what's the pushback from the government for?
Very simple. You see, the government is basically, in today's world, the government's basic objective is to win the next election. See, governments have two roles to play. One is they should win the next election because it is in their interest to win the next election. But they should also do what is right for the country. So to become populist is never good governance. And today's populism is defined by nationalism, by uber nationalism, funded by those who will benefit when you stop competition from coming in. So the role of the government is a very delicate role. It should look at popular interest. It should look at what people want, but it should do what is right for the country. And what is right for the country, very simply, is more and more trade. There is no way in which a country can progress if it becomes protectionist, if it shuts itself from the rest of the world, if it says that we will be this self-reliance, Atmanirbharta, Make in India. These are all slogans that were relevant 100 years ago. After that, we have seen, and you take any country in the world, if that country has grown from being a poor country to a middle income country to a rich country, one thing that is common to all these countries is trade. There are countries that didn't do too well on education but became rich countries. There are countries that didn't do too well on democracy and became rich countries. Few, very few. But the only thing common to every country in that top 20, in the G20 or G77, is that these countries opened up to trade. Look at South Korea and North Korea. Same country. What's the difference? One is closed, one is open. That's all. There is no other difference between the two countries. So therefore, it is very important for governments to realize that there are intrinsic advantages built into a trade system which relies on efficiency, which promotes competition, which ensures the best possible use of available resources. This is basic economics. Right?
Great.
That is what governments have to understand. Yeah.
On that point, there's a question on considering that China actually subsidizes their industries which are exporting. Does having tariffs against Chinese company make sense? Else, how would our companies compete?
Very good question. You see, one of the things that the WTO discusses is that where there are absolute or comparative advantages, very good. Those are natural advantages. India has a natural advantage in growing rice. India has a natural advantage in software. So India does well. But where India promotes an industry by subsidizing, by giving it free electricity, by giving it cheap loans, by having different norms for government procurement, that is when the WTO says, no, that cannot be allowed. So if the Chinese government, wherever the Chinese government provides subsidies to its companies, we had that famous solar panel case. There it is perfectly valid for countries like India, like the US, to impose countervailing duty. They are called countervailing duty. There it is perfectly valid. Now, should we do it all the time? Sometimes we don't do it because we say, all right, so what if China is selling it cheaper? In any case, nobody is making solar panels in India, so let's buy them from China at a cheaper rate. Everybody will be benefited by that. So in some cases, you might impose a countervailing duty where it actually hurts domestic industry, and where it does not, you might not impose it. Like, for example, we don't impose it on very many electronic products. But where it hurts the domestic industry, like in cement, we do have a countervailing duty. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Amar. So just few more questions that I want to quickly ask. One is, just a second, is on your views on intellectual property rights, specifically with the case of vaccines and all here, and its impact on trade of vaccines.
Very good question. Excellent. You know, I am a classical trade economist. I am very clear on this issue that intellectual property rights are sacred, have to be protected. Why should they be protected? The argument is very simple. They should be protected because you have to encourage the innovator. Basic human behavior, basic economic behavior is a function of incentives. If I do not have an incentive to produce vaccines, why will I produce them? So it is very foolish to argue that IPR should be withdrawn from vaccines. There is no need to do that. See, look at the polio vaccine. What happened? Why did it reach the whole world? We didn't. It wasn't because we took away the intellectual property rights from the inventor. It was because the inventor said, here, I have made this. It is my ownership. It's my patent, but I will give it free to everybody. AstraZeneca has said that. Moderna has said that. So therefore, those who will, they will distribute cheaper vaccines. The question in the vaccine story is really not about IPR. It's really about the role of the government. See, vaccination is a public good. Vaccination has to be provided to everybody. It should be provided to everybody for free. You may choose to buy it, that's fine, but you should have an option to buy it to get it for free. And therefore, the state must make vaccines available. When the state buys vaccines, when the state buys 2 billion vaccines, it gets it for very cheap prices because there is a lot of competition already, and it will get bigger and bigger. If India buys vaccines, how much will it spend? 100,000 crores. Right? We've spent 10,000 crores so far, 9,000 something. It'll be 90,000 crores. What's 90,000 crores in a 150 lakh crore economy or in a 30 lakh crore budget? Nothing. To use intellectual property there as an excuse is a poor excuse. Next.
Okay, thank you. So, okay, this would be last question because I've already taken a lot of your time. And this goes back to a traditional question. So it says people usually compare incoming foreign business to the East India Company's advent and eventual colonization and all. And even the example you gave of maybe having foreign companies take over airports and all, a lot of people would be like, oh no, we're selling our country to foreign countries, foreign people, we're selling our countries to private people and all.
Good question.
Yeah.
Here we have to again go back to the basics. What is the basics? What are the basic issues in economics? The basic question in economics is that what is a private good and what is a public? Now, if we are clear on that, what is a private good? A private good is something that is exclusive to people, that people pay for, that is provided by the market. In private goods, where does the state come in? Traveling by an aeroplane is a private good. It can in no way be a public good. Now that private good is provided by an Ambani or a Tata or a Elon Musk, how does it matter to us? Why should it matter as to whether the provider of a private good is from Bombay or from Boston? We don't do that for anything else we buy. Do we look at the nationality of the producer? No. Where there are public goods involved, there we are saying that the government is responsible. What is a public good? A public good is security. Fighting against China is a public good. There we need an Indian army. Collecting taxes is a public good. But for anything else, vaccination is a public good. But there we are not talking about governments, right? We have already sold it out. We are already saying that there will be a Bharat Biotech and a Serum Institute, unregulated private players. That is where you can argue that the state is responsible, and even there people like us argue that the state is responsible. The state should buy from wherever it can the cheapest vaccines available, the vaccines that can be sent to India tomorrow and vaccinate everybody. The point there is to vaccinate everybody. The point there is not to worry about who has made the vaccine. And that's the truth about anything we buy, isn't it? Do you go to a fancy restaurant and go check out the nationality of the chef? Unless you want French food cooked by French cooks, you don't do that, right? You when you go and buy a fancy shirt or a fancy shoe, you don't worry about whether it was made in Guatemala or whether it was made in Gujarat. So the question is that when we allow the private sector, if we think that privatization is a good thing, if we want to sell Air India, if we want to sell BSNL, if we want to sell the Life Insurance Corporation of India, how does it matter to the Indian whether it is Adani who buys it or Bill Gates who buys it? What we believe is that the more efficient should get it, because we want those resources used efficiently. It doesn't matter. The nationality doesn't matter. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had Indians sitting there working in NASA and in the CDC and whatever. They wouldn't want us to go. So that's the simple thing. What the point I'm making is that the objective of economic policy is efficiency. The objective of economic policy cannot be irrational things like nationality.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. I know I had said that was the last question, but I have one more question which
Go
came
ahead,
up.
go ahead. Yeah.
The question is, do you support RBI weakening the rupee to make exports competitive and to control imports?
No, I don't think so. You see, any intervention, any intervention in a market uh, is an aberration, and it disturbs the equilibrium. Now, there are certain, extenuating circumstances. Sometimes when you might have some strong reason to come in, but right now, I don't see that as a major issue, or I don't even see the RBI coming in making any major difference. So in that case, the intervention might not work. It just wastes some more money. Look at the exchange rate. The exchange rate has fallen from 54 to 74 rupees. Uh, and should the RBI hold on and not allow it to fall further? I don't think so. If the real exchange rate is 80 rupees, so be it. But when we become nationalistic about it and we say that no, the rupee rate should be so and so, then we start hurting our exports. That is the problem. Like the oil. Look at petrol and diesel. See, just because there is so much pressure because of a bankrupt state to keep on increasing taxes on petrol and diesel, we've come to this rather ridiculous position where petrol prices are going up even as crude prices are coming down. So any kind of intervention is inefficient, except in very, very, very dire circumstances. Like last year were dire circumstances. In some places, even this year are dire circumstances. But for the RBI to come in for import and export, that is not a dire circumstance. Exports will pick up soon because global demand will go up. And so long as we don't prevent our exporters by making, strange, by complicating import export requirements and GST requirements, they will do well. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Amit sir. And thank you so much
Thanks.
to everybody for asking the questions and
Yeah,
all.
wonderful.
Great. Amit sir, would you want to have some closing comment on the overall theme of like free trade vis-a-vis protectionism?
Yeah, I just want to end by saying that just as we are talking about the macro issues of protectionism, there is a lot of understanding that comes from reading about keeping competition out. That is the whole purpose of protectionism, and it takes all sorts of excuses for people to keep competition out. And that is the only single thing we should worry about. That when we look at the environment around us, when you look at the market, when you look at investments, look at this. Are we in some way keeping competition away? Whether it is in retail sector, whether it is in e-commerce, and those are big sectors. If that is happening, then that should be avoided. We need a good economic system is built on unbridled competitive forces. That's the best way of ensuring that prices come down, that supply goes up, and new equilibriums come into place. Thank you.
Thank you so much once again, Sir Dr. Ahmed. Like I said,
Thank you.
always a pleasure having you. And thank you to everyone who joined us in here today. Uh, just a second. So I'll just end the stream. Great.